Hands higher, don't move. You match a suspect description.
I'm an army major, I'm getting gas. We'll need to refill for change. Do not reach for anything.
The cruiser's spotlight hit him like an accusation. Elijah Carter froze beside pump number 4, the nozzle still in his hand, the smell of gasoline sharp in the cold night air. The patrol car rolled in too close, tires crunching over gravel, and stopped at an angle that blocked his driver's door like a warning. The engine idled, low and impatient. For a second, the only sound was the hiss of fuel and the faint pop of the station's failing neon sign. A door opened hard. "Hands where I can see 'em," the officer called, already loud, already certain. "Don't you move." Elijah lifted both hands slowly, palm out, careful not to spill the nozzle. His heart didn't race yet. It was late, he was tired, and he'd learned a long time ago that panic gave people an excuse to misunderstand you. "I'm just getting gas," he said, keeping his voice even. The officer crossed the lot with the swagger of someone who'd never been told no. White male, mid-30s, shaved head, jaw set like a padlock. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished, his hand already resting on the pistol as if it belonged there more than his own. "You got a problem following instructions?" the officer snapped. "No, sir," Elijah said. "My hands are up." The officer stopped 3 feet away and tilted his head, eyes narrowing like he was trying to fit Elijah into a story he already wanted to tell. Elijah wore jeans and a dark hoodie over a gray t-shirt. Nothing flashy, nothing threatening. He'd driven down from Fort Greystone after a 12-hour day of training schedules, briefing paperwork, and the quiet stress of being responsible for soldiers who trusted him. He had promised his 8-year-old daughter he'd be home in time to read before bed, and he'd taken this exit because it had the cheapest fuel and a decent coffee. Normal, boring, safe, until it wasn't. "What's in the car?" the officer asked. "My gym bag. Some paperwork," Elijah said. The officer's gaze dropped to Elijah's hands, then to the wallet outline in his pocket, then back to his face. "You alone?" "Yes." "Step away from the pump." Elijah did exactly what he was told, setting the nozzle back carefully, moving slow. The officer shifted with him, mirroring like a predator. Behind the glass of the convenience store, the clerk looked up from the register, eyes flicking to the badge, then to Elijah's raised hands. 2 customers near the drink aisle drifted closer to the front windows. Elijah felt the first pinch of dread, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because the officer was acting like wrongdoing was the starting point. "Why are you stopping me?" Elijah asked. The officer's face tightened, offended by the question. "Because I said so. Because this is a high-theft area and you fit a description." "A description of what?" Elijah asked. The officer's hand squeezed the grip of his gun as if the question itself was dangerous. "Turn around. Place your hands on the car." Elijah swallowed, glanced toward his sedan, then did as instructed. Cold metal met his palms. The station lights hummed above him. He could hear the click of the officer's radio, the small mechanical breathing of authority preparing to justify itself. "You got any weapons?" the officer asked. "No, you sure?" the officer said, voice dripping with certainty that Elijah was lying. "I'm sure." The officer stepped in close, invading the space between Elijah's shoulders and the car, and began patting him down with exaggerated force. The search wasn't about safety. It was about ownership. The officer's hands lingered too long at his pockets, yanked at the waistband of his jeans, shoved him forward as if testing how much pressure it would take to make him lose balance. Elijah kept his voice steady. "Officer, I'm complying." "Please, don't talk," the officer cut in. "Don't move." A phone camera clicked on somewhere behind them. Elijah couldn't see it, but he could feel the way the air changed when witnesses decided to record. The clerk had stepped outside now, hovering near the door with the anxious posture of someone who wanted to help but didn't yet know what help would cost. The officer leaned in closer to Elijah's ear. "You people always act polite right before you do something stupid." Elijah's jaw tightened. His pulse moved into his throat. He had heard versions of that sentence in different uniforms, in different cities, with different badges. The language was always the same, a verdict delivered before any evidence existed. "You're hurting me," Elijah said quietly when the officer twisted his arm higher than necessary. "You're not hurt," the officer said. "You're just dramatic." The officer stepped back, scanned the lot like he wanted an audience, then looked at Elijah again with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What's your name?" "Elijah Carter." The officer paused, as if the name didn't match the face he'd decided to punish. Then he recovered, sharper than before. License. Now. My wallet is in my back pocket, Elijah said. I can reach for it if you tell me. I didn't tell you to reach for anything, the officer snapped. Elijah felt the trap closing. If he didn't move, the officer would claim he was refusing. If he moved, the officer would claim he was reaching. Elijah lifted his head slightly, eyes catching the clerk's through the glass reflection. The clerk's phone was up now, recording from the doorway. Officer, Elijah said, careful. Tell me what you want me to do. The officer's radio chirped again. He keyed it without looking away from Elijah. Unit 12, I've got a suspicious male refusing commands. Possible intoxication. Elijah's stomach dropped. I'm not intoxicated. The officer ignored him. He reached for his handcuffs and snapped one cuff around Elijah's wrist, metal teeth biting skin. Elijah flinched. Stop resisting, the officer barked, louder, for the camera. I'm not resisting, Elijah said, breathing controlled. I'm standing still. The officer shoved him harder, slamming Elijah's chest into the car so the hood vibrated. The soda machines by the door buzzed. The customers inside pressed to the windows now, faces pale under fluorescent light. Outside, a pickup truck pulled in and slowed, the driver's head turning toward the commotion. The officer grabbed Elijah's other arm and wrenched it back. Elijah grunted, pain shooting through his shoulder. Please, Elijah said, voice strained. You're going to dislocate it. The officer's expression turned flat. You should have thought about that before you started acting like a criminal. Elijah's mind flashed to his daughter's face, the way she always asked if he was safe when he kissed her forehead goodnight. He had told her, gently, that he was trained for danger. He hadn't told her the danger sometimes wore a badge. The officer's hand slid down Elijah's hoodie and yanked at the front pocket. Something hard clinked inside. The officer pulled out Elijah's phone. There we go, he said, holding it up. Why you got two phones? It's one phone, Elijah said, confusion cutting through pain. The officer tilted it in the light. The screen was dark. He tapped it like he wanted it to wake up on command. When it didn't, he smirked. Playing games, he muttered. Then, to the clerk and the onlookers, back up. This man's armed. Elijah's breath stopped. I'm not armed. The officer's hand moved to his holster again, the motion practiced and theatrical. The clerk's voice rose from the doorway, shaky but loud. He hasn't done anything. He's just getting gas. Go inside, the officer snapped. Now. Instead, the clerk took one step closer, phone raised higher. Across the lot, the pickup driver opened his door and started filming too. In the store window, a woman pressed her hand to her mouth. Someone else inside raised their own phone. The little rectangle of light pointed outward. The officer saw the phones and his body stiffened, like he could feel control slipping. His eyes flicked down the ground near Elijah's feet, then to his own cruiser. His mind moved fast, calculating what story would survive cameras. Last chance, the officer said to Elijah, voice low again, dangerous. Where's the gun? Elijah's voice stayed calm, but there was steel under it now. There is no gun. The officer stepped back one pace. His gaze dropped to Elijah's hoodie pocket again. He reached into his own cargo pocket with his left hand while his right hovered near his weapon. Elijah caught the movement in the reflection on his car's side panel. A small object, dark, clenched in the officer's fingers, something not taken from Elijah, something the officer had brought with him. A planted prop. Don't you? Elijah started. The officer's arm snapped forward. He shoved the object toward Elijah's pocket and, in the same breath, drew his pistol like a man completing a rehearsed routine. Gun, the officer yelled. Time broke into pieces. Elijah felt the violent shove, his hoodie twisting, his body pinned. He heard the clerk scream, a raw sound that cut through the lot like shattered glass. He heard someone shout, he doesn't have, and then the gunshot swallowed everything. The impact hit Elijah like a hammer to the gut. Heat bloomed under his ribs. His knees buckled, and the world dipped, lights smearing into a bright tunnel. The officer grabbed him as he fell, dragging him down so his cheeks scraped asphalt, the roughness shocking against the sudden numbness spreading through his torso. Stop resisting, the officer screamed again, for the cameras, for the future report. Elijah tasted blood. His breath came shallow, panicked, involuntary. He tried to speak, but only a wet gasp escaped. The officer drove a knee into Elijah's back and yanked his arms behind him, cuffs biting deeper. Elijah's vision pulsed. He heard sirens in the distance. Or maybe it was his own ears roaring. "Look what you made me do," the officer said, almost to himself. Then louder. "He went for my gun. I feared for my life." The phones kept recording. The pickup driver had moved closer, shouting, "You shot him." He was on the car. The clerk was crying, still filming, voice broken as he pleaded, "Please, please, he's bleeding." The officer stood and kicked Elijah's side once, not hard enough to look like murder, just hard enough to remind Elijah, who controlled the ending. Then he paced toward the bystanders, face red with rage. "Delete that," he ordered, pointing at the clerk's phone. "Now." The clerk didn't move. His hands shook, but the camera stayed up. "No," he whispered. The officer stepped closer, towering over him. "You want to be next?" The pickup driver shouted from behind his open door, voice carrying. "Touch him, and I'll give this video to every news station in the state." The officer turned, eyes scanning the lot, realizing he had more witnesses than he could intimidate. And then, for the first time, doubt flickered, because he could feel it in the air. This wasn't going to disappear quietly. 2 more cruisers arrived hard, lights strobing blue and red across the gas station like a war zone. Officers spilled out, hands near their weapons, looking for a threat. The shooter officer immediately took command, voice sharp. He had a gun. "I dropped him. Secure the scene." One of the arriving officers approached Elijah, then froze at the sight of him bleeding on the asphalt. "We need EMS now." "They're coming," the shooter snapped. "Bag the weapon." "It's by his pocket." The second officer hesitated, eyes darting to the phone still up, then down to Elijah's body. Something about this didn't fit the shooter's confidence. Something about the angle, the lack of struggle, the stillness of a man who looked more exhausted than dangerous. Elijah fought to stay conscious. The asphalt was cold against his cheek. He forced air into his lungs, shallow, and controlled the way he'd been trained during injury drills. His fingers tingled from the cuffs. Somewhere above him, voices overlapped, commands, protests, radio traffic. Then the paramedics arrived, and with them came the first crack in the officer's story. A medic knelt beside Elijah, gloved hands moving fast, cutting the hoodie open. The fabric peeled back, exposing a dark stain spreading across Elijah's shirt. The medic's eyes flicked to Elijah's neck, where a chain had slid out from under the hoodie. Attached to the chain was a flat, worn piece of metal. A set of military dog tags. The medic's expression shifted. "Sir," she said, voice suddenly respectful. "Can you tell me your name?" Elijah swallowed, voice barely there. "Carter. Elijah Carter." One of the other officers leaned in, hearing it, and his face changed. Not recognition, something closer to alarm. The medic's hand found Elijah's wallet as she checked for ID and allergies. She pulled it out, flipped it open, and froze. Inside was a Department of Defense identification card, the photo matching the bleeding man on the ground. Rank, Major. Name, Carter, Elijah D. Branch, U.S. Army. The medic looked up at the shooter officer. "He's military." The lot went quiet for a half-second, like the world itself took a breath. The shooter officer's face twitched. His eyes locked on the ID, then flicked to Elijah's bleeding torso, then to the phones recording everything. He had crossed the line already. And now the man he'd tried to erase had a title the officer couldn't bully into silence. But it wasn't just the rank. Because the second card tucked behind it made the arriving lieutenant's mouth go dry. A state credential, embossed, official, unmistakable. Special advisor to the Attorney General. The shooter officer took one step back without meaning to. Major Carter's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and he saw it. Saw the realization hit the officer's face like a slap. The officer had built his entire story on the assumption that Elijah was disposable, that nobody important would ask questions, that if he wrote the report loud enough, the truth would fold. He was wrong. The lieutenant cleared his throat, voice suddenly careful. "Officer Renshaw," he said, reading the nameplate with new weight, stepped back. Renshaw's jaw clenched. He pulled a gun. The pickup driver yelled, "You planted that." The clerk's sobbing voice cut in. "We have it on video." Renshaw whipped toward the crowd, eyes wild. "Shut up." The lieutenant raised a hand, not to protect the crowd, but to protect himself from being attached to what was unfolding. "Nobody touch any phones." The lieutenant said, loud enough for all to hear. Everybody stay right where you are. EMS, keep working. Renshaw stared at him. What are you doing? The lieutenant didn't answer. He stared at the bleeding major, then at the gas station surveillance cameras mounted under the awning, their tiny red lights blinking steadily, indifferent and permanent. Renshaw followed the lieutenant's gaze and understood the real threat. Not the major's rank. The cameras. Renshaw moved fast. Too fast. He strode toward the building like a man trying to outrun consequence. The clerk saw it and panicked. He's going for the DVR. The pickup driver ran, phone still up, shouting, "Don't let him." Renshaw shoved through the door, knocking the clerk aside, and disappeared into the store's back hallway. The lieutenant cursed and sprinted after him. Another officer followed. Inside, through the glass, people could see shapes moving, hear shouting, hear a crash as something metal hit the floor. Then Renshaw stumbled back into view holding a black box tight to his chest, the recording unit, his eyes glassy with desperation. For a split second, he looked less like a cop and more like a thief caught mid-act. The entire lot saw him. Every phone captured it. The lieutenant grabbed the box, yanking it away. "Are you out of your mind?" Renshaw's voice rose, thin and frantic. "That footage is evidence," he snapped, trying to reclaim control by naming it. "I'm securing it." The lieutenant's face hardened. "You're contaminating it." Renshaw tried to step back, but another officer blocked him. And now, under the lights and the cameras, the shooter officer didn't look like authority anymore. He looked like a suspect. By dawn, Major Carter was in surgery. The bullet had torn through muscle, missed his heart by inches, and left him alive enough to testify. By noon, the story was no longer confined to a gas station. The clerk uploaded his footage after an out-of-state friend told him to send it somewhere safe. The pickup driver emailed his video to 3 local reporters before anyone could lose his phone. A customer inside the store posted a shaky clip showing Renshaw sprinting for the DVR, the lieutenant wrestling it away. The gas station owner released the surveillance footage when he realized his business would be burned to the ground by rumor if he didn't. The video showed the entire encounter from above, Major Carter compliant, hands up, body pinned to the car. It showed Renshaw's left hand dipping into his own pocket. It showed the quick shove toward Carter's hoodie. It showed the shot fired at point-blank range. It showed the lie being built in real time. Renshaw wrote his report anyway. He claimed Carter lunged. He claimed a firearm was recovered. He claimed heroism. But the digital world didn't care what he claimed. It cared what it saw. Within 48 hours, the Attorney General's office announced they were appointing a special prosecutor. The governor demanded an independent investigation. The police department placed Renshaw on administrative leave, then quietly tried to frame it as procedure, as if procedure could rinse blood off asphalt. Then Major Carter woke up. He didn't give interviews. He didn't posture. He didn't need to. From his hospital bed, pale and stitched, he requested preservation orders for all evidence. Body cam metadata, dispatch audio, radio logs, internal messages, prior complaints. He knew exactly what systems tried to do when they felt threatened. They deleted. But this time, the wrong man had been shot. And the shot had echoed into rooms the department couldn't control. Investigators pulled the body cam logs and found Renshaw's camera had malfunctioned 2 minutes before the stop. Conveniently, precisely, predictably. But the logs also showed a manual deactivation. A finger, not a glitch. Dispatch audio revealed another lie. Renshaw had not been called to the gas station. He had initiated the stop after running Carter's plates registered to a man at Fort Greystone. Then they pulled Renshaw's message history from a department-issued phone, and the hidden truth surfaced in black and white. He had been obsessed with military types living above the law. He had complained about these people moving into his neighborhoods. He had bragged to another officer that if he ever got one of them, the report would stick because nobody believes them over us. The other officer had replied with laughing emojis. Renshaw's defender's line, that this was a split-second mistake, collapsed under the weight of intention. Then came the witness statements. One by one. The clerk, the pickup driver, the woman inside who had filmed from behind the soda machine, a teenage cashier from the fast food place across the street who'd heard the shot and started recording the aftermath. Every account matched. Carter complied. Renshaw escalated. Renshaw threatened. Renshaw shot. And then, When he realized the victim had power, Renshaw tried to steal the truth. Internal affairs tried to contain it. They scheduled interviews late. They lost forms. They told witnesses they might be charged with interfering. But the special prosecutor wasn't local, and the FBI was suddenly interested in why an officer would attempt to destroy video evidence in full view of civilians. A federal civil rights investigation opened within weeks. Major Carter filed a civil lawsuit that named not only Renshaw, but supervisors who had ignored a paper trail, prior complaints for excessive force, racial targeting, and evidence irregularities. The lawsuit included depositions where commanders admitted they'd transferred Renshaw instead of disciplining him. They called it risk management. The public called it a cover-up. Protests grew, not as chaos, but as pressure. Organized marches, veterans standing in formation, clergy at microphones, families holding posters of Major Carter's bloodstained hoodie. The story wasn't just about one officer anymore. It was about a system that had created him, protected him, and expected the world to accept the damage as normal. Then the grand jury convened. Renshaw arrived in a suit, trying to look like a man being unfairly hunted, trying to reclaim dignity he had thrown away at pump number 4. But outside the courthouse, cameras were waiting. Veterans were waiting. The clerk was waiting. The pickup driver was waiting. Major Carter wasn't there yet, still recovering, but his presence filled the space anyway, because he had survived long enough to force the truth to stand up in public. The indictment came down like a gavel on a rotten foundation. Attempted murder, aggravated assault, evidence tampering, official misconduct, civil rights violations under color of law. Renshaw's face went blank. Not remorse. Calculation. The same kind of calculation he'd used at the gas station when he thought he could build a story and bury a man under it. At trial, the prosecution didn't need theatrics. They played the surveillance footage in silence. They played the clerk's phone video. They played the inside store clip showing Renshaw clutching the DVR like stolen property. They placed the planted gun on a table and called experts who showed there were no fingerprints from Major Carter on it. They showed Renshaw's fingerprints. They showed the route the weapon took from Renshaw's pocket to the ground. They brought Major Carter in on a slow day, when the courtroom was full. He walked with effort, his torso still healing, his face calm in a way that made Renshaw look smaller. Carter didn't speak in speeches. He answered questions in measured sentences, as if he'd learned in the military that discipline was how you survive pressure. When asked what he remembered most, he paused. Then he said, "The moment he decided I wasn't human. That's when it stopped being a traffic stop or a safety check. That's when it became an execution attempt." Renshaw stared at the table. The jury deliberated less than a day. The verdict was guilty on all major counts. At sentencing, the judge did not soften the language. "You abused the authority of this court, this state, and the badge you carried," she said, voice firm enough to cut through the courtroom's breath. "You did not make a mistake. You made a choice." She looked directly at Renshaw. "You will serve 25 years. The number landed heavy. Final. The kind of consequence Renshaw had never expected to face. He tried to speak, tried to protest, but the bailiff was already at his elbow, guiding him away from the life he'd used to intimidate others. Cameras captured the moment his wrists were cuffed, the same metal he had used to punish innocents now closing around him with indifferent precision. The aftermath didn't end with one man going to prison. The Department of Justice issued findings that the department had a pattern of unconstitutional policing, especially in stops involving black residents. Supervisors resigned under pressure. Body cam policies were rewritten with automatic activation locks. Evidence rooms were audited by outside agencies. A federal consent decree forced training reforms, reporting requirements, and independent oversight. The city paid a civil settlement to Major Carter that was publicly disclosed, not as hush money, but as admission. And Major Carter used part of it to fund legal support for other victims whose complaints had been ignored, their stories trapped in filing cabinets, until a camera finally made the system listen. Months later, Major Carter returned to the same gas station, not for a ceremony, not for cameras, but to thank the clerk who had held his phone steady when fear said to drop it. They stood under the same awning, the same lights humming overhead. The concrete had been scrubbed clean, but the memory remained, embedded in the place like a scar. Accountability had arrived, not as a rumor, not as a promise, but as a sentence, a reform, a record that couldn't be erased. And it started with an innocent man raising his hands beside a gas pump while an officer decided he could rewrite reality. If you believe justice should be public and unavoidable, comment what you would have done in that parking lot, and subscribe for more stories like this.